Let me welcome Margareta. She will say a few words. Thank you very much, Margareta.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Francis, for those kind words. You know, you're giving me the glory of lots of work that is done by so many other people, including yourself here. But really, what can a relatively small office like you and ISDR do if it wasn't for, you know, the enormous energy and drive, passion of so many individuals? So I think our main job is to keep all of you motivated, designated, focused in what is your area of expertise. And your area of expertise, I think, with the exception of 8 to 10 bureaucrats that I think were all in one session yesterday, is that you are experts. You bring an enormous knowledge to this meeting, to the world. And my particular passion, I must say, is to try to figure out what happens when people like me leave this room, when people meet science and technology. You know, what do we do with it? And how do we use it to turn it into real-life action? And I think that's the challenge of everything that you do and what we do. Our objective is to reduce the impact of disaster and disaster risk to countries, communities, cities, individuals. And you are spending your talent, your resources on tooling that. And I think that's, you know, not only necessarily a challenge in human terms, but it's actually the fantastic opportunity that we have today. It's to bring the expertise, the accumulated knowledge, the imagination and the innovation from technology and science into practical application of innovation, if I can say that, into governments, and to help, you know, governments and decision makers. And I think this is really the key dilemma, and I'm sorry to use myself as an example. When I have a problem, what do? I don't sit down in front of my computer and start searching the web. I probably walk down the corridor and ask someone. Now, I think this is a weakness in my behavior, and I think you can help me to improve my behavior by making that knowledge available in such a fashion that I can use it to take decision making. So that's the conversation I would like to explore a bit today. What you have done here, Francis, through this conference is, of course, to bring together all these elements. Maybe disproportionately technology and science, but you also have quite a large number of people like us who now think, so these enormous opportunities, what do we do? And already what you have demonstrated here is some of the things that you can do. So I hope this is only the beginning, and that out of this you will have a long stream of things that we do as next step, and that will be the great opportunity for all of us. So what we normally say, and my background is, of course, I have been doing disaster response and disaster relief operations for 25 years before I crossed the line and said there must be a different way to deal with this. And I'm sure, you know, my colleagues from India running the National Disaster Management Authority also had the same reflection, that there must be a different way of dealing with this. So we actually know a lot about disasters. We know a lot, and you know also a lot about disaster risk. We know that countries know that they are faced with disaster risk. I hope you are familiar now with the Global Assessment Report on Disaster Risk Reduction, which has made it out into this territory of public good where knowledge and information comes together, it's analyzed, and it says, this is the way it hangs together. Here are the causes, and here is the impact, and here is where we suggest that maybe you can do something about it. And it's, I think, quite easy to understand, but I'm sure other people would tell me that maybe it's not, so that's for development. Now, and still we are faced with the following dilemma, and I am traveling a lot, as many of us do in this type of work, and having this conversation with and realizing that the intellectual and scientific understanding of this is very far from meeting with actually changing the way governments, communities, cities deal with disaster risk. And in its simplest version, we say it's moving from reactive to proactive. These are the words we use. But it's much more than that. It's actually accepting intellectually and emotionally that you can plan for disasters, however mysterious that sounds. And in many countries, people will tell me it's a bit of an excuse, but it always comes up. Well, in my country, people, not me of course, but people normally see this as an act of God, and therefore it's very difficult to engage them in making these investments that are requiring. I take this very seriously because it means that the work of education, that showing the linkages, is a serious one that one needs to take on to. So all of you, I think you are around 400 people, you have in your hands the technology, the knowledge that we are increasingly using. We do use Google Maps, we do use Google Earth, but then we don't know what to do with it. Many of us. Some of us are still analphabets in this regard and not very literate. But I can see that it's beginning to happen, and it's an accelerating arena of use, and of course many governments have enormous capacity to absorb and use this technology. And now that you are here, and you do have government officials, you do have policymakers here, so this ability to translate what you have into a menu of options that are accessible to decision makers, I think is the greatest thing we can now put ahead of us. And I'm not only talking about governments that have lots of money and resources, I'm also talking about the government that came to one of our big meetings last year, which was the government of Maldives, describing their problem. And they turn to all of us, hundreds of people, and say, we actually have no idea about what to do. Who can help us? If you know what to do, tell us. Let's engage with it. And an increasing number of countries today, faced with their challenges of disaster losses, sometimes probably not very detailed, but the sense of globally that we are faced with challenges that are enormous compared to where we come from, with the impact of weather variability, climate change, people living in highly vulnerable areas, and institutional development and capacity not keeping pace with the number of people and our expectations. This is the city's evolutions. So as the UNISDR, we are 10 years old, in fact, but we've always worked with governments, with the World Bank now very intensely in the past 5 years almost, in very large cooperation now with civil society organizations. We have a strong parliamentarian network because parliamentarians actually make governments look at things that they can bring to their attention. They have huge constituencies. And we're trying to build this political commitment to engage countries to use fully their knowledge. You have in your hand a huge innovation basis. Praveen has briefed me, and I've looked through your document, and the words like crowdsourcing, that also the World Bank now has tested in doing post-disaster damage assessment in Haiti. The high-resolution Earth observations for hazard exposure, and many, many other huge opportunities that, when I start thinking about the universe that's opening up there, the reflections that I make is, how do we handle personalized information? Who's accountable for taking action on the basis of the information comes out? And who's ultimately responsible to sort of stream the information to those that can and should take action? And I'm sure these are things that you have discussed here, but I'm also sure that these are the things that you will discuss when you begin to make really clear for us what's the enormous opportunity here. I can share with you, and maybe many of you are already familiar with that, in the humanitarian community where I come from, we have for many years worked more or less closely with various kinds of, I should say, information communities. And living in an area where all information is public in a way, if you only know what you're looking for, you can get hold of anything. So this idea that we have of old-fashioned privacy, etc., is of course undergoing an enormous change. But when we're dealing with people in distress, as we do in humanitarian situations, I do think we have a very particular responsibility to think about what happens when data about individuals go out and get widely used. But more significantly, because I think that's a good code of conduct that all of you for sure can understand this and engage with, but a much larger, I think, opportunity is how do we make quick use of these opportunities that you have presented here, and who can make use of it? How do we make sure that it's available? What's the borderline between what is called in your community open source, and who knows when the open source actually becomes a closed source? How do we understand this better? People like us, people like me, needs to really be educated in how to ask the right questions to what is offered on that big space. I hope you are familiar now with the Yoga Framework of Action, which was in the post-tsunami month. There was a conference planned in Kobe, Japan, that no one would have ever remembered if it hadn't been for the tsunami. That, of course, had nothing to do with the conference. The conference was probably a rather technical opportunity. I wasn't there at that time. But thanks to the tsunami, the level of the political engagement probably tripled in about 3 weeks. And the number of participants in this conference also doubled. And the conference yielded a document called now the Yoga Framework for Action. What is that? Well, it's probably the simplest framework you will find related to the UN system. It's easy to understand. It says we have to take a new grip on how we reduce losses of life and economic impact of disasters. And they set up 5 overall goals that are clearly understandable. It's about institutional strength, it's about risk assessment, it's about education, it's about disasters, dealing with root causes of disasters that are actually developmental, and the capacity to respond because disasters do happen, and preparedness. Seems very simple, but I can tell you that when we are now doing the midterm review of the Yoga Framework, which is everyone's framework, and it does really say very explicitly that the first thing to do is what you are doing here. It's a risk assessment. If you don't know your risk, if you don't understand it, there's very little you can do in all the other areas. So it's putting that stream very clearly. I think the limitation of that framework is the following. Most people still link disaster risk reduction with disasters and disaster response. Whereas we are saying, yes, that's very important, but you have to move it to the development stream. You have to think long term here. Oh, not long term, you have to think 5 years, not just the next month. You really have to take seriously that even if you cannot pinpoint obviously the date of a disaster, you know that the probability that it will happen. And unfortunately, many countries today can pretty well pinpoint the dates as well with the regular hurricane season, the cyclone season. It's going to happen, if not this year, next year. So certainly we can prepare, plan, and invest much better for that. So the advances that you have made, of course, really pinpoints and enforces this understanding. And the more you do, the more you make available in all the precision instruments that you have and that you've discussed during this week, and you can make more and more available, the more you will push that agenda of inevitability and accountability among decision makers, that not taking action on this knowledge is going to become something extremely negative. A few weeks ago I was in a meeting where for the first time, I must say, I've heard a government minister say, when disasters happen, we ministers are under public scrutiny. We can lose our jobs on this. Normally this is what I try to tell them, but this time it was a public civil servant who said that to his audience. And he also said, and that's certainly true for his country, that natural hazards and disasters are one of the major challenges to humankind today. And I think the reason why he said that is because whereas in most other areas where we know risk, be it public health, even financing, maybe getting a bit better, I don't know. There is a sense of that as a government and as a public official, you do have certain control. You know what the issues are, you know what the stakes are. But I think for a government minister, when he looks at the natural hazards and disaster arena, they don't have that overview. They don't feel that they are really as fully in control. And that's where I think you are now in a position to help that happen within a reasonable time frame. So we have my colleagues here and all of you who have done the Global Assessment Report together. The Global Assessment Report is not our product. It's a partnership with the bank, with UNEP, with many, many other actors in the UN, academia and civil society. And a lot of data comes out of that, but it all remains at global level, most of it. The real challenge for us to be helpful, to be useful for countries, is to bring that risk assessment data down to national level, to local level, and to your city level, if you are a city mayor. And what it does do, the Global Assessment Report, is that it really unveils fully what are the disasters that happen. It's not the ones you necessarily read about the front page of the newspapers and that gives a few week attention on the TV. These are very large disasters. But the most costly ones are the ones that happen to communities all the time, every day, every month, that undermines completely their ability to build wealth, that destroys the roads, that tears down their school. That's the discrete scenarios that we are also trying to bring to the attention of those that are now reviewing the progress on the Millennium Development Goal. The fourth element of this, what I think the Global Assessment Report of Disaster Risk really brings to the forefront, and I'm pleading with you to contribute to this as we go along, it indicates that we do know very, very little, dangerously little, about the socio-economic consequences of disaster. Don't think 6 months, think what happens to a community in 10 years. They are displaced, do they come back? What happens to the education? What happens to the healthcare? There's some research on this, but far from enough to motivate, I think, decision makers to really change the way they do business. And that's why we engage so broadly with many social actors, political actors, is to bring this conversation everywhere. Parliamentarians, government officials, ministers of finance, planning people, health, disaster management, and everyone. And I think and I'm not at all, I think this is a natural progress, but I believe we are helped by the tsunami impact. I think we are helped by, in a tragic way, by the many large earthquakes that have hit urban areas. And we are helped by the political shackles came off the whole climate change discussion, and it's become a very public knowledge and increasingly better understanding. These elements together have led to that today many, many governments and organizations, in fact, are looking at the economics of disaster. Of course, the humanitarian, the human element is important, but only when you as a country begin to realize what it's costing you in dollars, euros. And I just picked up a few days ago in a newspaper that already the lack of water in China cost the country 2.3% of their GDP. And that's not a very small GDP. And this is only the drought. It doesn't include some of the major earthquakes they have. So, you know, water shortage, and in some countries, of course, excess of water, I think is really the major global challenge. And the cost is real, even though I think we are far from well equipped of the economics of disasters. We know enough. For many countries, it's a cost of 5 to 7% of the GDP. And the poorest countries, of course, have the smallest capacity to compensate for that. Also to mention that about 70% of the world has no insurance. So where are the losses going when the losses are absorbed by the poorest people and the poorest countries? Some of the insurance industry, I don't think they look with the great optimism to the future in terms of continuing to use their classical instruments, because they know that the losses keep increasing on them. And I think the willingness to engage in public and private thinking about how to tackle these challenges is really going to be very clearly important. Finally, I just wanted to bring to your attention also maybe for your engagement and creativity. We are just as ISDR launching our next global campaign for disaster risk reduction. And that is a campaign to build more resilient cities. And of course we are joining a group. We have Habitat has a campaign since year of sustainable cities. WHO has a campaign on healthy cities. And we think all this comes together extremely well in resilient cities, build stronger cities. So the campaign theme is My City is Getting Ready. And from this you will see that it's not us doing the job. We are, I would say, recruiting, mobilizing mayors, city leaders to a very strong network around the world. And together, the cities will, of course, assist each other with technical assistance. But the main purpose of this is really to bring to the forefront the political space that global risk is reduced at local level. And only if we engage at that level, and I think that's also a wonderful opportunity for you to help tailor the technology and the advances and the science that you dispose of to make available to city leaders, local government officials around the world to assist and work with them to move this whole topic forward. Many of you represent global companies already, I think, with global outreach. So we'll be very happy to engage you in these campaigns and the collaborative efforts that come out of this. With you, we will also, as practitioners and as bureaucrats, help to establish as we go down that way what are the norms and the practices and the ethics that we would like to inject in the constant questioning of how the evolution of the technology will be done. That's the only ideas I bring to you today, but I count on you now. As you can see, you come together here. And Francis, we will look to you to keep leading this process. Thank you very much.